Today, I'm with the first pick. It's time for summer scouting. And first up, the quarterbacks. Look, a lot can change between now and the 2026 NFL draft, but this class appears to be much deeper than the 2025 version that saw just 2 QBs go in the first round. Over the next 2 episodes, we're going to break down 10 of our favorite passers, at least as we sit here on the last day of June. How's it, June 30th? I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Ran Carthon. This is episode 273. And Ran, somebody out there somewhere has to care that we have 298 days until the 2026 NFL draft in Pittsburgh, PA. As producer Sharon noticed, Rand has a new background. He's in an undisclosed location where he may or may not have seen Beyonce this weekend. How was the show, Rand?
It was great. It was great, man. She's the ultimate performer. Like I said, it was phenomenal. I was at the show where she had the malfunction, so that was one. So I'm happy the queen survives, and we get to live to see her perform again. But it was a great show.
Not a Janet Jackson malfunction, just an automotive malfunction, apparently, according to Rand's reporting. So I suppose that's a good thing. And producer Sharon, you'll be happy to know that Rand assured me only his daughters were going to the show, and he somehow snuck in there. But that's how Rand is. Didn't invite either of us, but he can give us the play-by-play. I'm glad you had a good time. Looking forward to talking about some of these quarterbacks. Just a summer scouting refresher before we get going here. So Rand and I have watched the 2024 tape on all these guys. Going to highlight some of our favorite players, starting with quarterbacks, as I mentioned. My list is a little bit different than Rand's. He and I were talking about that last week, so that's going to be fun. It's always good to have differences when you're going through these lists. And then we'll give you some draft ranges for these players, some comps maybe, so you guys can throw this in our face in 298 days when they either go undrafted or go drafted first overall. And then we'll work our way through every position group for the next few weeks, so be sure to follow along. And by the way, we talked about this last year. If there's a player you want us to talk about that we don't talk about throughout the process of summer scouting, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Put that player's name in there, and we'll try to get to them before the season starts. All right, Rand, let's get to it. First up, I sent producer Stryker my top 15 players. So we'll look quickly. I think producer Sharon, we have players 11 through 15 on my list that we're just going to highlight. We won't talk about them here in any depth, but we'll circle back and talk about them probably before the season starts here. Carson Beck was, fun fact, Rand, he was my QB1 last summer. There's a lot of buzz about Carson Beck. I'm sure you saw him play plenty of times in person in the fall. Sam Levitt, shout out to Pete Prisco at Arizona State. And we'll talk a little bit more about Sam as we get through this in the next few podcasts, because I know Rand is much higher on Sam than I am right now. Eli Holstein is 13 out of Pitt. Miller Moss at USC a year ago. Great first game of the season against LSU that put him on my radar. He's since transferred to Louisville. And then Connor Wegman, who was a fan favorite over the summer and did not have a great season at Texas A&M. He is now at Houston. All right. Now, let's get to we're going to go reverse order here. We'll get to my number 10 on my list, and this is a guy you liked a lot, too. He played last year at Washington State. Is transferring to Oklahoma. John Mateer. And some fun things about John Mateer. My comps for him were part Baker Mayfield, part Gardner Minshew. And if you're a Napoleon Dynamite fan, part Uncle Rico, because funky delivery and that he's a sidearm guy. And you see the comps with Jackson Arnold there, who he's replacing. That said, quick release, the ball comes out with velocity. He's accurate in the quick game. He's a really good athlete, too. And I think he throws with anticipation, which is incredibly important when you're trying to think about this development to the next level. Consistently puts the ball on the faces of his targets. And there was a lot to like about what he did, Rand. I just wanted to see a little more consistency within the pocket. Sometimes he's looking to leave early, and I wanted to see him get through his reads a little better. But this is going to be fun to watch him at a high-power program like Oklahoma, where he'll be in 2025. What do you think of John Mateer? I have him 10th, so you can tell me whether you like that ranking too high, too low as well.
Well, I had him a little higher for me, and because I had him, I think I had him number 8 on my list, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, with an arrow going up, because I think him going to Oklahoma, I think it gives him a chance to have, better weapons around him and better protection up front. But like you said, my comp for him was he reminded me some of Baker Mayfield. He just has an it and a grit that you feel come off on tape, and he rallies the guys around him, which was what Baker had after he transferred from Texas Tech to Oklahoma. And you've kind of seen this happen within the Oklahoma program here of recent years. They have guys transfer in, and then these guys just take off. And so I'm excited to see him with this offense. and to see him, against quote unquote better competition. But like you talked about, man, he has that grit. He has the ability to run, which I think is underrated in his game. He ran for 800 some yards rushing last year, and he does kind of flee the pocket a little bit early here and there. But I think it's more so about him wanting to make a play. And that he does. He makes a ton of plays and made a ton of plays for Washington State. So I'm excited to see him grow. And I do think that by the end of the process, he's going to be a lot higher than probably your 10 and my 8.
I think you're right. He's 6'1", 224. I had him as a late day 2, early day 3 guy just over the summer. And I want to see him make those next steps as well. And when I think about summer scouting in terms of grading for me, it's not the end of the road what's going to be the case once draft night comes on April 24th, 2026. Just a starting point, just to get an idea of where I have him graded so I can sort of stack these guys. When you look at his big-time throws, his tape is as good as anyone in 2024. Great touch on deep balls and intermediate balls. And then we just talked about the recklessness at times and the carelessness with the ball that you want to see cleaned up. Anticipation is a great thing, but how concerned or how easy is it to fix? How quickly can you make that next step when you're trying to get from one read, drop your head and run, to get through more than one read, get to number 2, and even get to number 3?
So just circling back a little bit on, you were talking about the summer scouting. I agree with you 100%. The way I do summer scouting is there's no finite grade. I don't even necessarily put a grade on them. I just put them in color buckets. And for right now, we're just putting them in buckets and kind of stacking them within those buckets. That's kind of how I do it until we can get through another fall to, come up with a final grade. But to me, I think where he's going to grow again at an Oklahoma is that he's going to have better protection, which allows him and gives him more comfort knowing that I can work through my reads and get from 1 to potentially 3, in the progression. But the thing is with some of these guys, and like you were saying, the recklessness of it, at that quarterback position, sometimes you have to be aggressive with the football to score touchdowns and to score points, and you have to take chances. And that's why I felt like he felt like a Baker Mayfield. If you think about Baker Mayfield and the way he played at Oklahoma and through his first couple years in the league, there was some recklessness there, whether he was running the ball and knowing when to take a hit, when to lay out for the ball, for the first down, or versus trying to squeeze the ball into tight spaces. And when you talk about anticipation, if you think about it, most of the quarterbacks who don't have the strongest arm are the guys that are more anticipatory than the guys with the stronger arm, because the stronger arm guy knows I can squeeze it there. I can be a little bit late with my read, but still squeeze it through that tight window. And guys who don't have the arm strength to necessarily drive the ball downfield or make that far hash throw, they have to get it out early and be anticipatory to get it there.
And that's a good point. They've had to find ways to win without being an A+ in every single category. And if you don't have the best arm, you have to find ways to find those windows. So in that sense, and Mateer has a big arm too, so he can do a little bit of both. One thing I wanted to note before we take a break here and turn our attention to number 9 on my list here. Ben Arbuckle was the OC at Washington State the last 2 seasons. He is now going to be at Oklahoma with Mateer, so there's that relationship. Under Arbuckle last season at Washington State, offense ranked 12th nationally. They had 37 points per game, 22nd in total offense, more than 440 yards per game. Passing efficiency was high. Passing touchdowns were high, in part because of John Mateer. So they're bringing that with them to Oklahoma. So there's that familiarity, which is also going to help that transition for both the OC and the QB. So that's something else to look out for. All right, John Mateer in the book, number 10 right now. He's going to be moving up our boards, it sounds like, once the fall rolls around, if he can build on what he did in 2024. Going to turn our attention to number 9, a player who's only 21 years old, going to his 3rd school in the NIL era. And I was incredibly excited to see his tape and to have an opportunity to look at it, because you didn't get that feel just from the Saturday broadcast version of this player. And we'll talk about him right after this break. All right, Ran, I'll be honest with you. I was surprised that I like watching this young man so much, because in the fall, he had transferred from Texas to Duke. And the reason he transferred, I understand, Arch Manning was there and Quinn Ewers was there at Texas. At Duke, they were okay, but I went back and watched them closely earlier this summer. And Maalik Murphy showed me a little something I didn't know he had. He's only a redshirt junior, 21 years old, 6'5", 230. And I have him as number 9 on my list, just a smidge a razor's edge ahead of John McTeer, who we just talked about. And my comp for Maalik was what Joe Milton was supposed to be. Yeah, unless you include that Week 17 game for the Patriots where he played his best football. But what I was hoping to see from Joe Milton in Michigan and Tennessee that we never quite saw consistently. I love his frame, and Maalik Murphy throws accurately. He trusts his arm because he has an absolute hose. He can throw balls in the tight windows. He does it at all three levels pretty accurately. As I mentioned, the ball sizzles. He plays on time, which I was sort of surprised and impressed by. He'll throw with anticipation, which I always love seeing. He's not going to be a guy that leaves the pocket and uses his legs. He's more of a pocket passer. The bad is that he'll sometimes force throws downfield as if they're predetermined, as if he got something pre-snap that wasn't there post-snap and he just rolled with it. And it seems like he has a couple of bad decisions every game that can come back to bite him. But again, pleasantly surprised with what I saw. What did you think about Maalik Murphy? And I think I got your preliminary rankings here, and you had Maalik behind John McTeer, but and just outside the top 10, I think. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I had him, and I just pulled my list up. I had him at number 11 for me, and I had the same exact comp as you did as Joe Milton. And I thought they had similar size. I thought they had similar movement skills and overall passing ability. And this guy does have a very strong arm, but this speaks to more of Joe Milton's arm strength. I think Joe's, his arm was a little bit better. I am interested in seeing how he plays at Oregon State after transferring from Duke. I mean, you can't take away from him that he got 9 wins at Duke, and that says a lot to this young man. But like you said, I think he is athletic. I just don't see him as being a dynamic runner, if that makes sense. I can see he has the mobility to move around the pocket and extend plays, but I don't see him necessarily as a dynamic runner. You spoke to it. One of my main issues with him was the timing of his turnovers. He had his team in games or with the lead, but his turnovers came at a bad time that allowed the opponent to get back into the game. And so I think that's a part of his game that he really needs to tighten up. And then also just the consistency of the platform that he throws from. Sometimes you can see his base get really narrow, which allows the ball to get away from him or leads to some inaccurate throws. And so, once he tightens those things up, and that'll come with the more he plays, I think he will get better. But I see him right now, just in terms of our summer scouting, seeing what we saw at Duke last year. I see him as a developmental quarterback that has the physical tools and traits to develop and ascend a little bit past that level.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And again, it was fun to watch because I didn't have much in the way of expectations just based on the snippets I'd seen in the fall. It's funny you mentioned Joe Milton. Let me ask you this, because Joe Milton, I think, might have the top 3 arm in the NFL. Is his arm comparable to Will Levis's? I feel like it might be better than Will Levis's.
Joe Milton's arm is stronger than Will's. Joe has. We rank it in scouting, right? The highest tier you can get in scouting is rare, right? You have rare, you have excellent, you have very good, you have good. That's, then above average is the above the line group. And I personally think Joe Milton has rare arm strength. Haven't seen him throw the ball live, haven't seen him do his what I call trick shot throws in pregame. His arm strength is rare. There are not very many guys that can throw the football throughout the history of the game, the distance of the field and with the power and velocity that Joe Milton has.
Right. And that's what I was thinking, but I wanted to double check. And I mentioned that because our buddy Rick Spielman was beyond angry that they took the Tennessee Pro Day outdoors just because Joe Milton was throwing lasers 85 yards down the field and he keep hitting the roof. They didn't move it outside. He's like, that's never going to happen in a real game. And why are we moving around? And he said the same thing at the combine because, I think Milton had the 45-step drop and was just throwing the ball 80 yards inside the stadium there. So that was fun. But to keep that comp going, could it be a situation where we see someone draft Maalik Murphy as a developmental player and then he has a good preseason and maybe he plays late in the season if the team he's at isn't very good and he could parlay that into being traded for as a potential number 2? Because I think, to your point, neither Joe nor Maalik are day one ready to start, but you could certainly take advantage of an opportunity and find yourself even in year 2 with a chance to be that number 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it, I mean, there is a school of thought, excuse me, that comes from some front offices where you draft a quarterback every year. You
Mm.
draft a quarterback every year, and then there's going to, like you said, they're going to play these young guys in the preseason, and then there's going to be, a trade market for them, and then now you are able to get another pick and another shot, at being able to, get a player that's going to be able to contribute for you. So, yeah, I mean, the NFL and where we are now as a league, and where these college offenses come from, and to where the NFL comes from. I mean, you are lucky to get a quarterback like a Jaden Daniels that could come in day one, be your day one starter, and you just roll. These kids need development. And so why not take a swing on a guy like him who has size, who has physical tools and athletic traits that you can develop over time. And then we'll see where we are 2-3 years from now. And you may have found you a starter in the mid to late rounds.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind, I mentioned it earlier, is that Maalik is only 21. Joe was a little older coming out, and there were some frustrations for me, at least, that I wanted to see more in Michigan before he left there, and I wanted to see more at Tennessee, and it never just quite came together. He was obviously the backup at both places, and that perhaps has something to do with it. But I think we're seeing Maalik makes the most of his opportunities, and there's every reason to think that he could take some strides this fall and maybe make himself a solid day two pick. Because let me ask you this, Ran, when you're looking at day two quarterbacks in particular, Tyler Shough went 40th overall, and he was a little different in that he's 25, soon to be 26. But you're not necessarily drafting that person, especially if we're talking in round three, to be a day one starter. There's some things here they do very well, but with the understanding that maybe they need a year or two of development. Could Maalik Murphy fit into that category?
Yeah, again, I think so. And the thing that the one that name that just came up to my brain was, our own Cardale Jones. And he had his 1 year as a starter at Ohio State, won a national championship. But Cardale was a big, physical, talented guy that could throw the ball the length of the field if needed. And when he came out, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was a fourth round pick. And he was a quarterback that they wanted to bring in and work with. And so that's what you do. You take a shot on these quarterbacks who have physical tools and traits to develop, and just see where you are. And hopefully you have the program, you have the coaching staff that has a background of developing these guys, and you're able to maximize their talent.
Yeah, and I'll ask you this quickly before we take a break. Will Howard transferred from Kansas State to Ohio State, won that national title. Kyle McCord obviously left Ohio State to go to Syracuse, in part because he wasn't doing everything that Brian Day wanted him to do. There may be some comparisons between Will Howard, who's a pretty good athlete, big arm, 6'5", and Maalik Murphy. Will end up going in the sixth round. And it's not that he played poorly or anything like that. It's just sometimes these quarterbacks get pushed down because they don't check every box. I think ultimately it probably depends on where you end up landing. We saw Will Howard go to the Steelers. So anyway, we'll sort that out. It's going to be fun to watch. I think there's more physical tools with Maalik, and you and I will talk about that as we get through this thing. But I think we're going to take a break here, and when we come back, things are about to get saucy here, Ran, because I'm super excited about this next young man. Literally just turned 20 last week, and the arrow is pointing way up on him. And you maybe have an idea who it is if you're watching or listening, but we'll find out together. Number 8 on my list. We'll talk about him right after this break. Ran, I don't know if I've been more excited about a player in summer scouting than this young man, LaNorris Sellers out of South Carolina. Redshirt sophomore, 20 years old, turned 20 on June 23rd, I believe. So he is young, 6'3", 230. And I have him as a late day two-ish guy right now, and that is solely on the arrow pointing up and what could possibly be. As a runner, he might be one of the best running backs in the SEC because of his ability to run through people, make guys miss in space, drag defenders down the field. I'm not talking about defensive backs. He can drag linebackers down the field too, if he needs to. And at the Combine, we talked to a lot of folks that had faced him, SEC edge rushers, and to a person, they said he was one of the toughest quarterbacks they faced. Got a lot of baby Cam Newtons from them, so I'm running with that as a comp. And also Jalen Hurts as a runner. I think he's just as destructive as Jalen Hurts. I don't know if either Jalen or LaNorris are explosive as runners, but big arm, physical, can throw it through a wall. We just talked about Maalik Murphy and his big arm. He actually layers the ball pretty well to second level on second level throws and deep throws with zero anticipation, and I want to see that develop. And I thought he struggled at times or wasn't looking to get through his reads because it'd be one read not there, and then he knows he can just run over people. But again, he's only 20. He's a redshirt sophomore, so there's a lot of room for improvement, and he's supposed to be a great young man. So I love this kid. What did you think of LaNorris Sellers?
And I felt the same way, and maybe this is a gift and a curse, if you will. But when I was watching him, I felt like I was watching a slightly better Anthony Richardson. And I think, I think with the same thing with Anthony Richardson, where they have some growth. There's some growth to be had as passers, but I think Sellers at the same point. I think Sellers is further along as a passer than Anthony Richardson was at the time. But like you said, man, this guy, like, everything he does just jumps off the tape, from the way the ball jumps off of his hand, his arm strength, his athleticism. You hear it referred to as ball carriers in terms of receivers with run after the catch skills or running backs, guys being a tough tackle. You never really hear the quarterback position being labeled as that, but this guy is a tough tackle. And let's not just laminate over his athleticism, because he has plenty of that, and you'll see that. But this guy has wild throws. And for our viewers, if you want to see some of these wild throws, go watch the Illinois game and look at plays 51 and 62. You talk about pure wild throw. Those two plays will immediately jump off the tape. And again, we talked about in the previous guys, talking about guys that have transferred to different schools. LaNorris Sellers turned down some big offers to transfer to stay at South Carolina. And if we're being honest, like, he threw a lot from a muddy pocket at South Carolina, because at best the protection was shaky. And so you talk about him being a great young man. He wants to continue what he's doing and what they're building in South Carolina. So kudos to this guy for that. But I really love and where he's at. I think where you have him, I have him just slightly above. I have him at number 7 on my list, with the same thing, like you said, with arrow pointing up. Excited to see how he grows and matures as a passer and as a pure football player. But you talk about having dynamic qualities and traits, and this is what you look for in the NFL, especially in this new age NFL with the Josh Allens and guys like that. And how they've grown and grew the position is not just drop back and pass, and even though you need that part of your game, but these guys that can do both, man, they're a problem for you.
No, I agree with everything you said, and thank you for your explanation, because you might hear some noise in the background getting some work done in my house. I'm trying to keep up with the Ran Carthons of the world, and it is not cheap. I'll just say that. So if you hear some buzzing, that's what that is. The other thing that you talk about the AR comparison, and that's a fair one. The good news is LaNorris has played a lot of football, even though he's only going into year 3. He's been able to play that football. The offensive line, at times, if we're being fair, was not great at South Carolina. So he had to maybe he was a little gun shy. We've seen that with quarterbacks at every level that, 5, 6, 7 weeks in the season, they're tired of getting hit. So they're not waiting around to trust their tackles will be able to block those edge rushers. So I love him. And I think there's an opportunity that if he has a big season, are we talking like top 32?
I mean, there will be an argument for it. And I would say this, and this is something for us, for you and I, this is something for our viewers to watch moving forward for him throughout the season. What's the difference between LaNorris Sellers and Jalen Milroe?
One is a little bit younger going into this season. I think LaNorris is a better athlete. And he's bigger. He's 6'3", not 6'1".
But that's what I'm saying. And I just drew a blank. The quarterback was just Milroe. Milroe just went day 2. And so, like, why not for this guy? And we've talked about what Seattle could potentially be doing for him, having packages in for him. Maybe that's the same role for LaNorris. But like you said, he is young. He is young, and he's played a lot of ball. And for what we know, he could be in college for 2 more years. And now we're talking about a top 10 potential pick in 2 more years if he continues to ascend like we think he can.
Yeah, and we just saw glimpses of Anthony Richardson, and that's in part why he went so high. We didn't see the full package, and perhaps that's something to do with it. So I think if this is a big year for LaNorris, he is going to be a lot of fun to watch. You have anything else to add so you can not hear all this noise back here?
Yeah, I can keep going. So, but to your point, like we don't hear anything, or at least I don't hear anything, and so I'm good. I'm more worried about housekeeping coming and knocking on the door at this point. Trying to put me out of this room because I do have to check out after the show. But no, but I do. He was a fun watch, and and that's why I said when we're talking about Anthony Richardson and the comp for there, that's why I said it's a gift and a curse, right? Because it's the gift and what the physical tools and traits that led to Anthony Richardson being the fourth overall. But I don't want to say that where Anthony Richardson is at this point coming into year 3 as a quarterback and the questions that he has, I don't want to put that on LaNorris Sellers until we see what the final product is going to be.
One last thing I'll ask you before we take a break is that LaNorris doesn't throw a lot of anticipation. How do we see that progress happen this season, if that's in fact what needs to happen for him to get to the next level?
And that was one of the second notes that I took that I have in front of me is he's not much of an anticipatory passer. In my estimation, I think anticipation is more of an instinct thing. I think you either have it or you don't. Now, where you can get better with anticipation is just being more comfortable within the offense, knowing where the receiver is going to be. If it's if it's a speed out, where are they breaking it to? If it's a comeback, is it 18 back to 15 and just trusting that those guys are going to be there. But again, we talked about it on the previous segment of the show. This guy has an absolute cannon. And so he doesn't have to throw with much anticipation because he can squeeze it, in those tight windows and he can muscle the ball there. So even if he improves just a smidge with anticipation, like he's still going to be able to drive the ball and get it there. He just can't be too late patting it, especially, coming into the next level where guys are able to sit on it and jump routes, who study, quarterbacks who study offenses and know what route combinations are coming based on down and distance.
Yeah, I like the fact that you mentioned Jalen Milroe, what the differences are between those two, because I think that's a conversation we're going to continue to have. He's a little bit bigger than Jalen Milroe, maybe a little better athlete, maybe better runner, not a better athlete, a little smaller than Anthony Richardson. Again, similar athleticism. But if he takes that next step, top 32 for sure, and it might even be like a top 15 conversation because he is absolutely electric. All right, let's take another quick break here. We have these three guys down to number 8. Come back, we'll talk about quarterback number 7 on my list. Do it right after this. All right, I think we're going to have a little difference of opinion here, Ran, because we've agreed mostly on the players we've talked about so far. Number 7 on my list, Baylor redshirt junior Sawyer Robertson. He's almost 22 and a half years old, so a little older than some of the guys we've talked about. 6'4", 240. And I have him ranked just a smidge higher than the players we've all talked about. They're in the same bucket, but in terms of our conversation here, Sawyer Robertson's a little higher. I had a hard time coming with a comp for him. Size-wise, he's got a little Davis Webb to him, but I don't feel great about that, and we can revisit that. But I think if I have your list right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you had Sawyer at 12. So there's a little difference between you and me on that, and that's good. I'm okay with that. We can talk about it here. Let's see here. Nuance in the pocket. Does a lot of little things that I like. He looks off safeties and he'll rip the ball on ends on the other side of the field. I thought he threw a consistently catchable deep ball. Enough to loft underneath it to allow his wide receivers to run under it. Ball comes out quickly and accurately in the quick game. Can throw from different arm angles. And I thought he was tough. He will hang in the pocket and take a hit and deliver a ball down the field. And I hate saying sneaky athlete, but he's a pretty good athlete. They have some design runs in there for him at Baylor. He's not going to be LaNorris Sellers, nor will he ever be confused for LaNorris Sellers, but he can move a little bit for you if you need him to. I do wonder how strong his arm is, however. And look, man, that's the biggest question when you're talking about making NFL throws. Throws a little tougher in college because of the hash marks. But again, number 7 on my list. I want to hear why you had him at number 12.
I'm just going to be honest. I just didn't think anything physically like jumped off the tape to me. And it's just, I kept looking. And again, I watched the Iowa State game. I watched the Houston game. I watched the LSU game. And I was just waiting for that one physical thing to jump off the tape where you're like, okay, this is a trait we can hang our hat on. And I didn't quite see it. I see him at this point being an eventual backup quarterback. Like you said, I thought he was a good quarterback athlete. I liked the size. And I thought his arm strength was probably right at the low level of being good. And, you know, he uses his athleticism to extend plays. And I think he can run, but I think more of his athleticism is to move outside of the pocket. And I thought he did a good job of keeping his eyes downfield as he was extending plays. Now, again, going back to him and the mechanics of him playing quarterback, I thought in the pocket a lot. He didn't play, you know, with his knees bent. I thought a lot of times in the pocket he was straight-legged, narrow based, and I thought that, you know, mixed that with him having a little bit of a wind-up delivery, it allowed the corners to jump passes that you saw, you know, in the games that I watched, you know, and I didn't think he threw the tightest ball necessary. So, you know, it was just those things. And I made notes for myself. Like, I want to go back and kind of study his third down passes and his fourth down pass. And I felt like Baylor in the games I watched, they went for it a lot on fourth down. So I want to go back and look at those numbers. And, you know, I have to say, I didn't feel like he had the best supporting cast, you know, at Baylor as well. And obviously that hinders you. But I had him a little bit further down. Again, just nothing really jumped off the tape, you know, in the games I viewed. Maybe I need to go back and look at some other games at this point just to see and just to confirm. But he was a little bit further down on the list for me at number 12.
Producer Sharon, Rand talked about not the best supporting cast. He explained to me that you can't have a receiver wearing number 34, which Baylor does, and I think that got Rand's attention. Put him in a number 3 or number 4, not a number 34. He might have been a running back. I'm not sure. But it's interesting you say that about the lack of consistent spirals on some of the throws, because that does stick out to you if you're watching, and you want to know, why doesn't the ball come off his hand as well as it does for some other guys? And you're, not surprisingly, but right on this. The big-time throws last season, he had 15. They were all pretty much deep balls with great touch and accuracy, second, third levels, and those get your attention. But the turnover-worthy plays, he had 16, so one more than the big-time throws. He got fooled by coverages a lot. He would predetermine these second-level throws, and he would be loose with the ball behind the line of scrimmage. And look, you can get away with that if you're Lamar Jackson. You can't get away with it if you're a mostly pocket passer. One other thing I want to ask you, Ran, about Sawyer in particular is arm strength, and you talk about right there at the edge. How would it compare to someone like Brock Purdy, who was Mr. Relevant, but obviously just got paid because he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now?
Yeah, I think with Brock, I think Sawyer's arm is probably a smidge better than Brock. But Brock's, you know, the thing that helped Brock was obviously the anticipation and the accuracy and just knowing where to go with the football. And the thing that Brock learned the more he played and had the supporting cast that he had in San Francisco was just get the ball on the guys and put it in a position where they could do the work. With Debo, with Kittle, put the ball out in front so they could catch it and move. You know, you don't want to necessarily put it on the back hip unless you're protecting them, getting them to turn away from a, you know, impending defender. But put it in a way where they can catch it with their momentum going forward and give them a chance to do what they do best, which is run after the catch. And the same thing with Brandon Ayuk. And I think he grew even more as a quarterback when he realized what he had in his weapons and that he didn't have to be pinpoint accurate. He just had to put it in a spot where they could get it and allow them to do their thing. It's kind of like playing point guard. You know, you have to figure out where every one of your guys, where they like the ball. Like the really good ones, I remember seeing a video with Jason Williams, White Chocolate, and he knew where every guy on the court, where they liked the ball. And so that he made that his duty. I'm going to get you the ball in the spot and in a way that you like it so you can catch and shoot or dribble drive to the basket. And it's the same thing playing quarterback.
Shout out Jason Williams. Crazy to think that both he and Randy Moss were from West Virginia. I think they played together at some point. One of the best 2-on-2 teams ever. One of the other things I wanted to make note of, and you talked about maybe Sawyer's arm's a little bit better than Brock's, but you talked about all the things that Brock does well, and you have to do well at the next level. And we sort of talked about that in previous blocks earlier today, that you have to be able to throw with anticipation. Your accuracy has to be through the roof, and Brock checks all those boxes. We'll see what that means for Sawyer. He was a Mississippi State transfer. He went to Baylor and obviously had a pretty good season, has a chance to build on that. I don't know if he's going to find his way into day two. Day two is sort of this weird sort of landing spot for quarterbacks because typically you either go top 32 or then teams wait on you. And that's sort of what happened this year outside of Tyler Shuck. Before we take a break, though, I wanted to go through our summer list from a year ago now that we have a moment, just to sort of point out all the things we don't know when we're talking about quarterbacks, 9 months before the draft, or in this case, 298 days. I mentioned Carson Beck was my number one. Shedeur was my number two, and that held throughout. He was my number two through the draft, obviously went in the fifth round. Quinn Ewers was my number three, and we talk a lot about Shedeur. Quinn had a tougher draft process than Shedeur did. He ended up going, I think, sixth or maybe even seventh round to the Dolphins. Jalen Milroe, who I had a mid-day two grade on last summer, and that's exactly where he went. Oh, look at this, Rand. Some guy named Cam Ward was 5, and that's an example of a guy, questions coming out of Washington State, wanted to see what it looked like when he transferred to U, and took full advantage of that. So I'll ask you, what did Cam Ward do that maybe some of these guys we're going to talk about need to do to take that leap from? And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I talked to teams that had Cam Ward as a day 3 guy, 2 years ago, and now first overall pick a couple weeks ago.
I'll say this. Had Cam Ward left Washington State, I agree he would have been probably a day 3 pick. If he left early, probably would have been a 4th round pick. You would just have to know Cam and how he plays, and Cam just has that ability to raise the level of the guys around him in just the way he plays. But then if you saw the way he played at Miami, he ran the offense, and the offense ran through him. And just the way he played the quarterback position, he distributed the ball. And what you like to see out of these quote unquote franchise quarterbacks is, are you the reason why your team wins? Right. And that's why I don't like, throwing this franchise quarterback tag around, because in my opinion, God only made 3 or 4. If we're being honest about the 32 starting quarterbacks in the league and we're using the real franchise quarterback label, there are only 3 or 4 of those guys. And the rest of the guys are good quarterbacks, but Cam Ward does have franchise quarterback it about him and the way he plays. And so God only made 3 or 4 of those. And that's why I don't believe in running these quarterbacks up the board, because it's just an unfaulty expectation put on them that they're not ready for.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And, everyone knows this. Sometimes demand outstrips supply. So you overdraft these young men, and rarely does it work out. And sometimes it does, but it's a hard, good luck playing a tougher position in any sport, and good luck trying to find that position when you're in the position to draft these players. In case you're wondering, I had Drew Aller number 6 a year ago. He came back to school, which I thought was the right move. Riley Leonard was number 7, and a lot of that was just on potential. I don't think he quite reached it. Garrett Nussmeier was 8, came back to school. We'll probably talk about him. Number 9, Connor Wegman, didn't quite reach expectations. He transferred out of Texas A&M. And then finally, Jackson Dart was number 10, ended up being the other quarterback to go in the first round back in April. So a lot can change is what I'm saying when you look at this list 298 days from now. All right, one more break here, and we're going to talk about another insanely athletic, built-in-the-lab quarterback, like almost everyone else is transferred, and we'll talk about that player right after this break. All right, down the home stretch here, Ran. Number 6 on my list. Countdown from 10 all the way to 1. This will be a 2-part podcast. Nico Iamaleava, formerly of Tennessee, now at UCLA through some wild circumstances. Redshirt sophomore. He'll be 21 in a couple months, so still extremely young. 6'6", 215. I have him as a mid to early day 2 guy, solely because of the things he can do on the field athletically. There are a ton of question marks, in much the same way we've talked about some of these young players like LaNorris Sellers. But I'll give you the floor because you've seen him in person twice, last season and the year before. And I would imagine several times you had to pick your jaw up off the floor watching him do some things. And I'll just say quickly, my comp for him was question mark Justin Herbert. Like, I really don't know where to put him because he's so young, but athletically he is freakish, even by these quarterbacks we're talking about standards.
Yeah, and I don't quite have a comp for him yet, just because I want to see, more body of work. But like you said, man, this guy has like red traits, and you see that, and that's what you kind of hang your hat on. I will say at this point, for me watching him, and I do have him ranked number 6 on my list as well, I think he is more flash than consistency. At this point, you talked about the height, you talked about the athleticism, you talked about the arm strength, and his arm is strong and it's live. The ball jumps off his hand, and he can really drive the ball, from the far hash. But the one part for me that was just very inconsistent was the accuracy. I thought it was above average at best. And the problem that I had with him was that he missed a lot of the gimme throws that you like to see quarterbacks make in their sleep. And then in the games that I viewed, which was Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State, I only saw him complete 2 deep balls, and he forced the ball downfield a lot. And I only saw him complete 2 deep balls. And so those were problems for me. And like I talked about before with the athleticism, like he can pull the ball down, run, extend drives, but he has to learn how to protect himself. He took some shots that he absolutely should not be taking. But again, this guy, man, when you talk about just pure traits, like he has all of the traits. You just want to see him put it, together. Like he has some red traits. He has what, in my scouting term, he has some purple traits, and we can get to that and what the colors mean, in a later date. But I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt for now, and I think that he does have starter level ability. You just want to see him bring this whole picture together at UCLA. Now, I will say the structure of the offense, and I don't know the offense at UCLA, but I think it'll be a little bit more of a structure there than it was at Tennessee. If you go back to even when Hendon Hooker was at Tennessee, a lot of it was just reading the conversion routes of the receiver. And so those quarterbacks in the Tennessee system can't really throw with anticipation because you're waiting on the receiver to convert his route. And it's really an offensive based on 3 routes. And the receiver kind of have not necessarily carte blanche to run what they want to run, but it's a lot of conversion, and you just need time to see that. Hence why they play with such wide splits to allow things to open for him. So interested to see how he plays in a more structured offense at UCLA.
I'm so glad you mentioned all those things about the Tennessee offense, because the anticipation wasn't there. You just explained why. They play with those extremely wide splits. So if you're uncertain where to go with the ball as the quarterback, and you're playing with such wide splits and you throw late, it's going to look like you don't know what's going on, or you're throwing balls into harm's way. So it'll be interesting to see in a little bit more conventional offense, I would imagine, than Tennessee's, which seems reasonable. Maybe we'll see a different version of Nico Iamaleava. So a lot of things that we can hopefully see him improve on. There'll be the conversation about why he transferred and the demands for more money, or whether there were demands or not, and we can cross that bridge when we get to it. But I think you talk about Ran athletically. There are very few guys that look like this guy getting off the bus and warming up and running wind sprints. So there's a lot of reasons for excitement. Right now, knowing only what you've seen on tape, and you're picking 32nd or whatever, and you need a quarterback. Let's say you're the Steelers. Would you rather have Nico Iamaleava or LaNorris Sellers?
I think when it comes down to it, and just the nature of the position, and I don't want to cast anything on him, I would probably lean more LaNorris Sellers right now, just because of the makeup of what we know a little bit about the kid. But this is why you have to go through the full process and get to know these kids personally. That's what you're hearing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Because the media's perspective, my perspective, and one of the great things about my job working with you and Rick formally is that you get a peek behind the curtain that, yeah, the tape matters, but 45%, maybe 55% of everything else matters, and that's going to be incredibly important. All right, 10 through 6 in the books. We'll be back later in the week to talk about our top 5. My number 1 is a little different than Rand's and maybe other people's. We'll get Rand's top 5 in there as well. We'll mix that up. In the meantime, you can follow With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast. Scan that QR code for all the summer scouting. See you guys in the next one.